Hey guys, so here's part 3 of our 6.5 notes. Now we're going to be talking about our starting points in our H and K, which deals with translations, and continue to talk about our A value. Okay, so we have the general form of a square root. It's going to be y equals A times the square root of x minus h plus k. So A, as we talked about, tells you if you're going to go up or down. So basically, remember, negative A says we have a reflection. Positive A says we do not have a reflection. When we take the absolute value of our A and it's greater than 1, we have a stretch, or a vertical stretch to be more specific. And if our absolute value of A is in between 0 and 1, that is a vertical shrink. So we've talked about that already. Now the other thing is to talk about our H and our K. So remember, if we have square root of x minus h, that means we will translate right. And if we have a square root of x plus h, that means we will translate left. So that means we move our graph side to side. And then here, if we have a positive k value, that means we move our graph up. So we say translate, that's like the key vocabulary there. But if we have a negative k value, that means we move our graph down. So how we're going to graph this when we do have our h and k is we're going to graph the parent function first. Then we're going to use our translations to move each point to get to our final answer. So make sure you have this written down. So if you got to pause the video to write all this down, make sure you do that, because we are going to include this into our next few examples. Okay, let's go ahead and do our next one. We have y equals 3 times the square root of x minus 2 minus 4. Okay, notice with our a value 3, that means we are going to have a vertical stretch. Now, when we talk about graphing the parent function, that is going to include a. So here, we're actually going to graph y equals the square root of x. Our h and k, we will use that to translate our graph to get our final answer. Okay, because this is the square root, remember we use the same 4 numbers. That's going to be 0, 1, 4, and 9. Now we plug this into y equals 3 times the square root of x. So I get 0, and the square root of 1 is 1, times 3, and then I get 6 and 9. Now I go ahead and graph these points. So that's 0, 0, 1, 3, 4, 6, and 9, 9. Okay, now let's talk about how much do we translate. So we have an H and we have a K. Remember, H represents we translate either right or left. K represents we translate up or down. So here, write this here. With our H, because we have x minus 2, remember we do actually the opposite of what we see. That's with our H. So some of you might have been confused, like, we have x minus h, why are we going to the right? Well, don't forget, you do the opposite of what you see for your H value. So since we have x minus 2, that means we're going to translate right to, and the k value is exactly as we see. So since we have a negative 4, that means we go down 4. So each point that we graph, we're going to go to the right 2 and down 4. So I go over 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, over 1, 2, down 1, 2, 3, 4, over 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the last one's going to be kind of off the graph. That's okay. There we go. And then we connect the dots. There we go. Okay. Now, from there, we are going to find the domain and range of the blue graph, because that's the function that they gave to us, okay? Now your domain and range, that's going to come from our h and k values, really that starting point. So for our h, notice that for our x, we start at 2 this time, and because our graph is going to the right, we're going to positive infinity. And then notice for our y, the smallest y value here is -4. And because our graph is going up, we go to positive infinity. Okay, let's go and do another one just like that. Here we have y equals -2 square root of x plus 1 plus 3. Okay, notice with our -2, that means we will have a reflection because our a value is negative, so it's going to open down. And if we take the absolute value of that -2, that gives us +2. And so since 2 is greater than 1, that means we are going to have, once again, a vertical stretch. Now we'll talk about our translations when we have our first graph down. So remember, when we graph, we're going to graph basically y equals a times the square root of x. So that's our parent function. So remember with square roots, we use the same 4 numbers, so 0, 1, 4, and 9. We plug that into our square root of x and then multiply by -2. So I still get 0, I get -2, I get -4, and then -6. Okay, so I start at 0, 0, I go to the right one down 2, 2, 3, 4, 4, and then 9, 6. So I connect my dots. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk about my translations. Okay, so here's my h, and here's my k. So because I have x plus h, so an x plus 1, remember we do the opposite of what we see. So that means our graph is actually going to translate left 1. And then the plus 3, the k value is exactly as we see it, so we're going to say up 3. So each point that I plotted, I'm going to go to left 1 and up 3. Now I connect those dots. Now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the domain and range of the blue function, or the blue graph I have. Okay, so we go basically from our starting point. Okay, so that's going to be -1, 3. Okay, notice that our graph for the domain, we start at -1, and our graph is going to the right, so that means our x values are getting larger, so going to positive infinity. But now let's look at our graph. Notice the graph is going downwards instead of up. Well, to represent going down, remember that's going to be represented as -infinity, okay? So that's our smallest value, so we go from -infinity to the largest or highest y value. In this case, that's going to be the starting point. So our largest or highest y value is 3, and that is included because we have a solid point. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about the transformations of cube root functions. This is going to be the same thing. Your a, if it's negative, you're going to have a reflection. A positive a means there is no reflection. If the absolute value of your a is greater than 1, that's a vertical stretch. And if your absolute value of a is in between 0 and 1, that's a vertical shrink. Now you don't need to rewrite this because this is going to be the same exact thing when we talked about with the square root, okay? Okay, when we have cube root of x minus h, remember h is the opposite of what you see, so that means here we're going to translate right. And if you have the cube root of x plus h, you're going to translate left. And then if we have a positive k, that means we translate up, because that's exactly as we see it. And then if we have a negative k, we're going to translate down. So it's the exact same thing when we talked about our square roots. Okay? Okay, now let's go and apply this to an example. Okay, we have y equals 3 times the cube root of x plus 4 minus 1. So what we're going to do here, let's kind of write out some of our transformations. Well, first of all, When we take the absolute value of 3, it's just positive 3. Since that's greater than 1, that's going to be a vertical stretch. Now, just like we did with these square roots, I'm going to graph the parent function. So that is going to involve the a value, but not the h and k. So we are going to do y equals 3 times the cube root of x. Now remember, we use the same 5 points to graph a cubic. And so that's going to be negative 8, negative 1, 0, 1, and 8. Now let's go ahead and plug this into our function. Cube root of negative 8 is negative 2 times 3 gives us negative 6. Cube root of negative 1 is negative 1 times 3 gives us negative 3. We just get 0 here. And then cube root of 1 is 1 times 3, and we get 6. So don't forget your numbers repeat for the y, but the signs are going to be different. Okay, go to negative 8, down negative 6. Then negative 1, down 1, 2, 3, 0, 0, reverse it. There you go, there's our graph. Okay, now what we're going to do is take each of those points and translate them given our h and k. So remember, h is the opposite of what we see. So since we have x plus 4, that means we're going to translate left 4. And then with the minus 1 for our k, that means down 1. So I go over 1, 2, 3, 4, down. 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 And this one's going to go kind of off the graph, which that is okay. And I connect those points to create my graph. There we go. Okay. Now the nice part, as we've talked about, all cube root functions will have the same domain and range. That means our domain and range for this cube root function is just going to be negative infinity to positive infinity. Okay, so that's how you graph cube root and square root functions. Make sure you guys work on that homework assignment. So it is going to be a worksheet, so make sure you fill out the worksheet, you check your answers with the key, and then what you're actually going to fill out to get your points is it's just going to be a verification. So all you have to do is click on that verification, and it's going to ask you 2 questions. Did you complete the worksheet? And hopefully you say yes. And did you check your answers with the key? Please say yes. And then you just get your 10 points. So this is really based on completion instead of more on the correctness. Okay? So if you do have questions, make sure you contact me, and I'll see you guys later.